Ear.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is exactly 11 after 8 o'clock. Welcome to the program. You tuned into News and Views on Salam Media. Our first guest for the morning is Lukhona Mnguni, political analyst and researcher. We are looking once again at the issue around Phala Phala. Okay, so President Cyril Ramaphosa is looking to nullify the findings of the scathing Section 89 Phala Phala report and render any action that could be consequently taken by Parliament as unlawful and invalid on the basis that the panel misconceived its mandate and misjudged the information presented to it. Lukhona Mnguni, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
No, a very good morning to you and a good morning to your listeners of Salam Media.
Okay, nice to have you on air. And your thoughts on President Cyril Ramaphosa looking to nullify those findings?
Look, I think it's going to be what I call a massive political gamble for the president, because remember that the nature of the independent panel is not to deliver a verdict of guilt on the president. And when I read the president's 56-page affidavit placed before the Constitutional Court, there seems to be some degree of expectation on his part that, you know, the panel should have dealt with the evidence before it by way of the standard applied in a civil or criminal court, in that you would want to check for the authenticity of the evidence, how the evidence was acquired, therefore dealing with the matter of that evidence being admissible or not. And then, of course, he complains that the panel did a reverse onus on him in terms of the burden of proof, that the panel took whatever it was given by way of submission and then depended on whether or not in his own submission he presented adequate evidence to rebut the claims made. It's a bit of a difficult one in the sense that the panel can only receive input from members of the National Assembly. It cannot, for example, go to Arthur Fraser and say, supplement the affidavit that you gave the horse and give us more evidence. It cannot call upon witnesses to check even the veracity of the claims made by the president in his own, submission to the panel. And the panel tried very hard to explain how it interpreted its powers insofar as the rules of Parliament are concerned. And it said that part of that is a determination that says, look, their powers are not equal to the impeachment committee. And therefore, it can't be that Parliament would have conceived a situation where the panel is called upon to make a verdict on the seriousness of the evidence, which would, in interpretation, materialize to being the president found guilty. So he disputes that the panel interpreted correctly its terms of reference. He disputes that the panel applied itself within the rules of Parliament. And I do think that what might actually also come out of this process is the very review of those rules that govern the removal of a president using Section 29. So that's Section 89. So that's really where we are. The Constitutional Court, of course, will still have to determine whether it's going to hear the matter at all. On the other hand, some political parties in Parliament are already agreed that they were not cited in the papers of the president. The citation of the respondents was done quite in an interesting way by the president, because the panel has to exist and the report is the property of Parliament. So he should have actually cited the speaker And the National Chairperson of National Council of Provinces as the people who received the report, the Secretary of Parliament, and then all parties represented in Parliament. But we will see, because I'm sure some parties will want to enjoin the proceedings and pave way for their participation. But it's delaying the kind of proceeding on this matter, because the parties would have to fight as to why are they interested parties when they are not cited on the papers as respondents, and then jump that hurdle and then go to substantive issues and so on.
Okay, Ramaphosa cited in his application that the panel went beyond its mandate, which restricted it on aspects concerning evidence, stating that the panel was irrational in its evaluation of evidence. Is he correct in that, summation of obviously that comment?
I don't think the president has a case there. The proceedings of the panel were determined by the substantive motion submitted by the African Transformation. In the supplementary information placed before the panel, and the panel is duty bound by the rules to give the president all information that was submitted to it, unfiltered. So they gave the president everything that was presented. Now, in part of the things that he's agreed about is that the panel then went on to ask questions that were not for it. For example, whether or not President Ramaphosa sought the assistance of his Namibian counterpart in dealing with this issue. What is curious is that where he vehemently disagrees with issues, he states it in the papers. But on this issue of his Namibian counterpart, he simply fleetingly says, even if he had done so, this would not have been a breaking of the law. And this is exactly why an impeachment committee is important, because the president under oath must be asked, if you ask your Namibian counterpart to assist you, and he gives a response, and if he says yes, you then interrogate the nature of the assistance that you are looking for, and to what degree that assistance was a lawful request, especially within the instrument of international law that governs the relationships between countries, the management of suspects cross-border, and the things that must be put in place, and whether or not going directly to the president of the country and not to the necessary authorities would jump certain steps which could prejudice those who are accused in terms of how they are handled cross-border and so on. And you remember, the whole Zimbabwe rendition story. There can be mishandling of these things in law. And so the law has to be followed and applied at all times. So it's not enough for the president to say, I'm not going to offer a response to this. But anyway, even if I had done it, it's not lawful. This is exactly why an impeachment committee is necessary. And I think on the balance of probability, when all is said and done, the Constitutional Court will say, wait, we want to attack a parliamentary process at this stage. Is this report so injurious to the president that we need to halt it? And I'm not too convinced that the president. I'm not too convinced that the president has a cut-out case on this one. It's a very big political gamble he's taking, because if the Constitutional Court affirms that independent panel by Justice Sandile Ngcobo, then the president suddenly opens himself up to something else that he then used the majority of the ANC in Parliament to avoid being held accountable.
Okay, let me just share this with you. I think you've covered most of the questions I've put to you in much detail, and I thank you for that. Ramaphosa's application read as follows, and I quote, I submit that the panel misconceived its mandate, misjudged the information placed before it, and misinterpreted the 4 charges advanced against me. It moreover strayed beyond the 4 charges and considered matters not properly before it. In the second part of the relief sought, he applied for leave for the courts to allow him to bring this matter directly to the ConCourt in the interest of justice in terms of Section 167(6)(a) of the Constitution and Rule 18 of the rules of this court. That's part of, obviously, his application. That's what it read. On the other hand, as far as the general public and other legal experts are concerned, there's a lot of talk about prima facie evidence. Let's try and tie up the two. His idea, the president's idea, that the panel misconceived its mandate. They overshot themselves as far as he's concerned. And where and how does prima facie evidence play into this case? How is it going to hurt or help President Ramaphosa in the ConCourt?
What the Constitutional Court has to do is to look at the avenues that were available to the independent panel and ask itself, given the terms of reference of the independent panel, is it even possible for that panel to get to a level of determining that the evidence before it is sufficient? So the fight is whether or not there is sufficient evidence in the prima facie case. And the panel, when it constructed its interpretation of the terms of reference, said, well, it has to collect both evidence and information. Now, on the basis of information, because it is not an investigative panel, I mean, some judges have called it what they call it's a sniffing exercise. Is there something here to go after, given what was submitted by members of parliament, given what was submitted by the president, on the probability of reading all these written materials? And of course, some parties have even included media articles, opinion pieces. There were videos and photographs. There was a redacted report from the Namibian police. And the president does not say this redacted report does not exist. He simply questions whether it was lawfully acquired. Now, unfortunately, that's not within the ambit of the independent panel, because the independent panel can't send a letter to the Namibian police and say, come, explain yourself, because that would be an investigation. The independent panel is there to evaluate what members of parliament submit to it, what the president's response is to that information, and they make a determination. When all is said and done, the recommendations at the end of the report of the panel constrain themselves to the charge in the motion by the ATM. So I'm not sure. I mean, the president is addressed by certain paragraphs within the report, but the recommendations themselves don't open up new matters that were not part of the charges placed on the president.
Okay, my final question then to you, Lukhona. I can see you've truly applied your mind to this matter. Let's look at the best case scenario as far as the outcomes will be at the ConCourt for the president, worst case and best case scenarios.
Well, look, I think one, the ConCourt will take this matter very seriously. They will grant direct access, because one of your questions. They will not send the president to the High Court. I think that's very unlikely. The best case scenario for the president is for this report in its entirety to be reviewed, set aside, and deemed as being unlawful. But unfortunately, Section 89 of the Constitution does not die. But all that it will be needed would be another party or the ATM to resubmit a Section 89 substantive motion in the same and similar way that they did, and the speaker will be duty bound by the rules to appoint another independent panel. So that's the limitation of the president's rules. His success in reviewing this panel does not make Phala Phala go away, does not make Section 89 of the Constitution go away. But his worst case scenario is a situation where the Constitutional Court even goes further and say, once the request to review and set aside this report as unlawful and unconstitutional is set aside, and we don't accept it. and furthermore, remind him of his duties of accountability as a president, and even quote from the Nkandla judgment that was delivered by Chief Justice Mukwege that defined a president as a constitutional being. If you read that judgment, over 2-3 pages went on to just define the president and the duties of the president and ventilate in some degree questions around what conflict of interest means when you open yourself up to that conflict. But the last determination that the president is a constitutional being, and that means not just only to the letter of the law, but also to the spirit of the law. And how the president is conducting himself now is more on the letter of the law and has forgotten about the spirit of the law. And that is something that he needs to reconcile. Now, the Constitutional Court could actually set the parameters of the extent to which he should be accountable on this matter on a far higher threshold, which will then pave way for a future impeachment committee to reference the Constitutional Court and put himself in a really difficult position.
Okay, so really the key words here are conflict of interest. And I'm kind of thinking if you make a comparison with what Ramaphosa is guilty of compared with Zuma during his tenure, this doesn't, to me, seem or sound as serious. Your thoughts?
Look,
would this, okay, let me just add something else to this, Lukhona. Your thoughts on this matter, and is it serious enough for them to insist on the step aside rule being implemented against him?
Look, the ANC has made it very clear. They will only request you to step aside if you are charged with corruption or serious crime. So that doesn't arise here.
Okay.
Because the step aside rule has now become a legal instrument rather than a political moral accountability instrument. So there's no charge against the president. Insofar as the NPA is concerned, he has not been cited. So that step aside thing does not even arise. But the ANC is still struggling with things. How do you hold your own leaders to a higher standard? They are going to go and defend the president, but they actually themselves don't have answers to the questions that South Africans are asking. How does the president end up with cash? I mean, how can you have so much money in cash in your house, which you know, and it gets stolen, and you really don't care about it? Well, you go there some days later just to find out what happened and you know, satisfy yourself. That tells you something about the hands-off, but also almost negligent behavior. And the president is also trying to create the same impression he created with the CR17 bank and the bank account. So he said, no, I don't know who the donors were. There were people managing those funds, but he was going to gala dinners and addressing them, and they were fundraising gala dinners. And the EFF actually expelled 2 members of parliament who approached the president, and he directed them to the funds that he knew he had for assistance, and they were assisted. So there's no way that he did not know. And in any case, if he didn't know, those who were running those funds, Benjamin Chauke, Nicole Donnell, Marion Sparks, Dabengwa, got deployed to the States. Dabengwa was part of the board at ESCOM. The other 3 are in the presidency. So they know who the funders were. So when the funders approached the presidency, they actually are probably conflicted to deal with that. So they might shield the president from knowledge, but it doesn't change the effect that the funders, or would have been funders, might still have influence and directives in terms of what should happen in the presidency, because the agents who were running the trust are now in the presidency.
Okay, that's where we will have to leave it. And I'm just kind of wondering if this will have any bearing on the elective conference, and how damaging is this issue going to be in the general elections come 2024 regarding the ANC, because you know, we had a corrupt president. We now have Ramaphosa that's mired in the CR17, and now the Phala Phala scandal. I should imagine it does and has given quite a blow to the ANC, has it not?
the biggest blow it would have to the ANC is if those who are opposed to President Ramaphosa, when it comes to next week and Parliament must determine this issue, one, either they abstain from voting on the day, or they simply don't attend the sitting, and opposition parties actually get their wish, which is to proceed to the next stage on the impeachment committee. That would throw a massive political spanner off in the works of things just 3 days before the conference. But if the president goes and gets a second term in this conference, what opposition parties will do is to profit from this Phala Phala saga and keep it as alive as possible towards 2024. And the ANC once more will become typically a party that protects its president on their own private interests. And South Africans will feel that maybe it is time to really just look elsewhere for solutions and leave these muddied waters that refuse to clear of the ANC to their own devices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you indeed, Lukhona Mnguni, political analyst and researcher, weighing in on the issue around Phala Phala. I do appreciate your views and your time this morning. Thank you. God bless and go well.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you.
8:33 exactly, news and views right here on Salam Media. Standing by to talk to us is a research fellow at AfriCID, and that, of course, is Aisha Kaji. Please do stand by for that interview.